Earlier this year, I received an inquiry about a very unusual commission. I don't normally discuss or show client commissions here on my channel, but this one deserves special attention. Claire had submitted a design for the Emily Williamson Statue Campaign, a campaign to erect a statue of Emily in the public park at her former home. In March, Claire found out she was one of 4 finalists, and the next stage of the campaign is to create a maquette of her design, which will then face a public vote alongside the other 3 finalists. Claire had set her heart on the Victorian-style bustle dress I had listed in my Etsy shop. She loved the classic fit of the bodice and the way the fabric draped and folded down the back of the skirt. I set to work creating her a version of this gown in wine red taffeta.
So this evening I have been joined by the lovely Clare Abbatt, who is the sculptor who commissioned me to make the dress, which she has then worked from to create her commission for the Emily Williamson Statue Campaign. And I'm very excited that she's joined me to answer a few questions, because I've got no idea about how you go from making a small clay sculpture to the mini maquettes, which have just been revealed on the 1st of July, to then potentially a full-scale, life-size bronze sculpture. I have no idea how any of that works. So Claire is going to answer a few questions for me this evening, and I'm going to capture it here for you now. So I was a little bit surprised in some regards when you commissioned me to make the dress, because I kind of thought, well, could you not just work from a drawing or a photograph? I presume that having that 3D kind of element to work from is helpful in some way.
Yes, for me, it's essential, particularly in a project like this, where the intention is to, I'm just going to show you. Here's my model. So the intention is to create, it's a figurative piece, of course. I wanted, for a start, it to be historically accurate, and to work from the model wearing the dress the beautiful dress you made for me is just, there is no comparison working like that to working from photographs. And I certainly did research, but it really is important for me to have a model and the and the dress to work from.
So you can see why I was excited. It's not every day you get the chance to be involved with a project like this. Now, I know my dress is inconsequential really in the grand scheme of things. It's just a visual aid for Claire to work from. What's important is Emily's legacy and the commemoration of an almost forgotten woman from history. Okay, so we've just arrived here in Manchester. We've just pulled up outside, we think, the gardens in the park. We're not 100% sure, we don't know the area very well. But it's absolutely tipping it down with rain. You can probably hear it on the car roof, and we will insert a little bit of footage here as well, just to show you what we just drove through on the motorway. Welcome to Manchester, people. So we're going to go for a little bit of a wander. This rain is probably going to be around for about an hour. We've got, I think, 20 minutes until the parsonage opens, which is where the exhibition for the statues are, or the maquettes with statues are. That is just across the road. I think we passed the gate for that. I think we're just going to go for a little bit of a wander, try and stay dry, but we'll try and get some footage in the park as best we can in the rain. But driving through the little town here, Didsbury, it's a very pretty little town. It's a proper Victorian suburb, lots of Victorian kind of houses, and the little sort of pretty sort of town square. All looks very, very nice. So I'm excited to see the house where Emily lived. So much water. Seen this gateway? It's amazing. Emily Williamson was born in 1855. In 1882, at age 27, she married solicitor Robert Wood Williamson, whose father was the curator of Manchester Natural History Museum and Fellow of the Royal Society. They lived at the Croft, a beautiful arts and crafts house in the leafy yet expanding Victorian suburb of Didsbury near Manchester. Here they created a stunning alpine garden, which is now a public botanical park, left to the people of Didsbury by the Williamsons' neighbour, Fletcher Moss, who lived across the road at the parsonage. Later in life, Emily and Robert moved south, and Robert turned to anthropology, becoming honorary treasurer of the Royal Anthropological Institute after joining an expedition to explore and study the interior of British New Guinea in 1910. But prior to that, in 1889, something happened that ensured Emily would leave a very important legacy. She held a tea party. Nothing too auspicious in that, you might think, but in my opinion, there is no better way to set the world to rights, or indeed start a rebellion, than over a cup of tea. At 34 years of age, Emily Williamson decided to take on the might of the Victorian fashion industry. A few years earlier, in 1886, Frank Chapman of the American Museum of Natural History performed a head count during an afternoon's walk through Manhattan and wrote his findings in a letter to the editors of Forest and Stream, which is a journal of outdoor life, travel, nature, study and shooting. In that one afternoon, he counted 700 ladies wearing hats, of which 77% were adorned with feathers or birds. Some of the species recognised include grebes, blue jays, common terns, cedar waxwings, and northern orioles. Now, it's quite likely that Emily would have been aware of this report, given her own interest in the natural world and her close family connections to men moving in the higher echelons of natural scientific studies. Grebes were in fact Emily's favourite bird, and they were almost hunted to extinction so that ladies might adorn their hats with their feathery crests. As any respectable Victorian woman would do when wanting to protest, she wrote letters. She wrote to the British Ornithologists' Union asking them to take a stand, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. They weren't interested in the protestations of a young woman concerned about fashion. Barred from joining these male-dominated societies, and unable to get her voice heard, Emily decided to start her own all-female society. So, in 1889, she invited her friends to tea, and asked them to sign a pledge to not wear feathers in their hats, excepting birds killed for food, or ostrich due to the harvesting of its feathers not being painful. Thus, the Society for the Protection of Birds was formed, and even in its first year, the group gained notoriety, being mocked in Punch magazine for its restrictions being not a very self-defying ordinance. But to me, the fact the group was noticed by the likes of Punch magazine implies that they meant business, and that they were doing things to be noticed. Because was wearing feathers so terrible? Surely, just wearing a few feathers doesn't do any harm. I don't know about you, but when I think about millinery, whether modern or historical, my natural instinct is to trim it with feathers. Hats and feathers just seem to go hand in hand, and they always have done for hundreds of years. However, that, I feel, is the crux. With my interest in fashion history, I was vaguely aware that the use of feathers was highly fashionable in the late 19th century, and even reached the extremes of using whole taxidermy birds through into the Edwardian era. And I vaguely knew that this eventually led to laws being passed to prevent importation of feathers for the millinery industry. But I honestly had no idea how horrifically the fashion trade decimated bird populations, until I started learning more about Emily. And then you understand exactly why Emily, her colleagues, and other organisations around the world took a stand. In this next section, I'm going to cover some facts and figures that you may find distressing, but I think it's important for understanding exactly what the Society for the Protection of Birds was up against. If you want to skip this part, I will put the timestamp in about here now. However, I'm not going to show anything particularly graphic, it's just facts and figures, but they do make for uncomfortable reading. In 1913, William Temple Hornaday published his book, Our Vanishing Wildlife, Its Extermination and Preservation, in which he highlights the numbers of birds sold at the London feather sales in 1911. Given the known fashion trends and the length of time Emily and her colleagues were campaigning, I think we can assume that these numbers are fairly representative across the years previously as well. I also want to point out that these figures are from just 4 sellers at one sale room in February 1911, and these sales happened 3 times a year. Similar sales also happened in other major cities. Sales of birds or bird skins are as follows. Birds of paradise, 9,212. Herons, 1,313. Eagles, 2,600. Condors, 1,580. Hummingbirds, 24,800. One of the other birds listed is the egret. These are the birds that produce the beautiful wispy white feathers that you see adorning countless Edwardian hats. These feathers are so fine that they were once worth more than gold and sold by the ounce. Each ounce required feathers from at least 4 birds, and in London, 6 birds were preferred. The February 1911 sale records that 6,346 ounce packages were sold. That means 38,000 birds were killed. And if that wasn't shocking enough, particularly in reference to the egrets, they only develop those desirable feathers during the nesting season, and the only way to harvest them is to shoot the birds in the nesting grounds, leaving the young to die of starvation or be picked off by predators. I mean, I've read over these figures quite a few times now as I've practiced reading this this text, and it still shocks me. I just cannot get over the numbers. It's unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. I mean, I'm not a vegetarian or vegan, and I don't want this to turn into a for or against using animal products argument. I will wear leather and I will wear wool, and I will continue to do so until more viable, non-plastic, eco-friendly alternatives are available. However, the use of animals and the wanton decimation of species purely for fashion or for monetary gain is abhorrent. It's beyond abhorrent. And at the height of the Edwardian era, between 1901 and 1910, the exotic feathers imported into the UK was valued at almost £20 million. And this is why I want to highlight the importance of Emily's legacy. And while I show you some footage of me making the gown, let's catch up with Emily and what became of her society and her campaign, and why she's going to have a statue made to honour her legacy. So, just 2 years after being created in 1889 and mocked in Punch magazine as another one of those silly ladies' societies, the SPB actually merged with another all-female group from London called the Thin, Fair and Feather Folk. They kept the society name, and Emily became vice president. In 1893, they boasted 10,000 members. In 1899, 20,000 members.
In 1904, the Society received royal assent, which meant it became the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, the RSPB. If you're watching this in the UK, then you will have probably no doubt heard of them. But if you're not from the UK, the RSPB is to this day one of the most well-known, well-loved, and highly influential conservation charities in this country. It boasts over 1.1 million members, has 12,000 volunteers, and maintains 200 nature reserves.
Why did you want to become involved with the Emily Williamson Statue Campaign? And what inspired you and your piece, your submission in particular?
Yes. Well, I will go back to when Tessa Bowes, the historian, whose researchers got this whole project underway, she got in touch with me about 3 years ago. Must be 3 years ago now.
Oh, wow. As long ago as that?
Yes, because she started researching. She really felt that there was a project in this. Emily Williamson, as you know, founded the RSPB in 1889. But her part, her kind of key role in the RSPB was completely forgotten. And Tessa realised that Emily and her co-founders, Etta Lemon and Eliza Phillips, they had been ignored. And she really felt that, that what they achieved needs to be known. And the story, it just completely caught my interest. I had an idea for a drawing. So Tessa actually hadn't asked me to do a drawing, but she sent me the photograph of Emily, and that's quite interesting because there was at this point no known image.
I was going to say it's the only image we have of Emily, isn't it?
Yes. Well, actually, I found one of her as a child with her family.
Oh, goodness.
When I was researching online. But you're absolutely right. That beautiful image of her as a young woman, it is the only known image of her as a young woman. Anyway, to go back to the photograph, it just engaged me, and I was curious, what was she like? I was very interested to know what motivated her. And I had an idea for a drawing. So I contacted Tessa and I said, look, I've got an idea for a drawing. Would you like me to have a go and see what you think? So I'll just get it. Well, this isn't the drawing. This is a print, which has actually come out rather darker than the drawing. So this is taken directly from the photograph of Emily. But my idea is that these birds flying across the image, well, of course, they represent, her interest in birds. But I thought also, that they go right across her face. And I wanted them also to be like thoughts kind of flying through her mind, So anyway, that was the first drawing I did. And having done that, Tessa then asked me, I think it was about a year later, she asked me to do a drawing of Etta, again as a young woman. So again, there is a photograph of Etta as a young woman reading. So I again, that was my direct reference. But the bird she was particularly concerned about is the bird of paradise. Yes. And the feathers were being used. And in fact, not only the feathers of these birds, but the whole carcasses were being used in millinery. So, and this bird was threatened with extinction. So it's almost as if, she's reading a book and almost as if she's imagining the bird, thinking about it, and it's almost as if it's flying off the page. So that's
where you've got it going. Sorry, excuse me for interrupting. I just love the way you got it, like lifting it, almost like a phoenix, flying out of the book. Because some of the research that I've done into sort of historical costume and sort of the millinery, although I'm not a milliner, obviously it comes as part and parcel with my interest in the costuming, but very often the birds are the other way up. They kind of point down a lot of the time, especially when they use the whole taxidermy sort of carcass of the bird. So it's a lovely juxtaposition there, I think, that you've captured in that one.
Then the last co-founder they worked with she was a slightly older woman, Eliza Phillips, and the bird she was particularly interested in was the egret.
Yes.
And this was also threatened with extinction. Now, the thing about Eliza is that there is no known image of her. It just hasn't been found. So Tessa got in touch with me and said she'd really love the trio. And, what did I think we could do about it? And so actually my husband, Tessa called me one day, and that evening we started looking online for anonymous photographs of Victorian women. And she doesn't look exactly like this, but we came across a photograph album that was for sale, and not a single image in that album has a name to it. And this woman in particular stood out because she's got such a direct gaze. She looks strong.
Yes.
So it kind of captured my imagination. And I thought, she would be an ideal model for a drawing of Eliza. So that's what I based this drawing on, and included the egrets. And I suppose in a way the inclusion of the birds, it's slightly surreal, the way they appear in the drawings, but I really wanted to have the birds as part of the image.
Would you like to explain a little bit about your own submission and how you came up with the idea and how you developed that?
So my proposal has Emily Williamson, the adult figure wearing the Victorian dress. Alongside her, I had the idea of including a child, because I really do want to address the kind of future.
Yeah, you spoke about that before, didn't you? How
yes.
RSPB going forward, and
yes. And I must just explain that in the mould making process at the foundry, they've been damaged a little. It's sort of inevitable when you take, unfired clay and they have to make the mould. It can happen. So I'm afraid the child's just lost her leg here and the hands have got a bit damaged. But the child figure, it kind of came about because I was really inspired by this relationship of the Sir Patrick Bateson, Emily's great nephew, and then Melissa, her great niece, who's now a professor of animal behaviour with an interest in starlings. So Melissa's mother very kindly sent me some photographs of her when she was a child, and I've kind of based the child figure on Melissa as a child.
How lovely.
And it's been lost in the mould making, but my bronze maquette, she holds a starling because that is her specialism. And also it's a fact that unfortunately the starling population in Manchester has declined by 40% in the last 2 decades. And I was talking at the launch, I was talking to the mayor, Tommy Judge, and he said as a boy he could remember, often in the evening they just watch flocks of starlings, that amazing display. But he said you just don't see them now. So again, I wanted to kind of highlight, these issues that in the environment and conservation that we're quite rightly very concerned with today. So yes, that is how the my proposal came about.
You don't really think about the RSPB as being such an old organisation, you know, in many regards. You know, it's such a well-known kind of charity that we're all aware of today. Yeah. But you always kind of, you just assume it's quite modern, don't you? But to think it actually started in 1889 is quite incredible.
It is. And of course, well, you know a lot about fashion, but, you know, the fashion at the time for feathers, bird carcasses incorporated in hats, and species were threatened with extinction. So
it's just shocking, isn't it? I mean, you kind of think, you know, you put a hat on, you put a feather in it, you know, it's that kind of assumption that we all have. But then when you actually think about it, and then when you actually look into the fashions, and I was kind of aware of, you know, obviously I had an awareness of these fashions and of the Plumage Act that came in the 20s because of these fashions, but I had no idea about, you know, how the fight started. It's been so fascinating to learn about that through the campaign, and to be introduced to this incredible woman who fought for it from the beginning.
Absolutely. And actually, I love again, these women lived at a time when women were not expected to be vocal, and, you know, campaigning on issues was, you know, I think they were very courageous.
The ravages of the plume hunters to feed the seemingly insatiable millinery trade almost wiped out the egret populations in Florida. The plight of the egret became the focal point of hard-hitting campaigns. The lady secretaries of the RSPB strived to inform women exactly what the cost of their frivolous new fashion accessory would be. They called out milliners and damningly inspected samples of feathers at haberdashery counters to find supposed faux feathers that were actually just the real thing.
I really do feel a commitment, a real interest in it, and I feel that, you know, what Emily achieved is so important. Yes. And really worth celebrating. And I don't just want it to be a memorial to her. I want to think about how this is taken forward and what the RSPB is doing today. So anyway, I can honestly say my heart's in this project.
Can you briefly, as much as possible, explain the process of creating the maquette statues, and how you sort of from the basic beginnings sort of through to the finished process of the little maquettes?
It was specified that the maquette should be 40 centimetres tall.
Is that normal for this kind of commission?
I think that was the same with the Emmeline Pankhurst, and I think, you know, it's quite a good domestic scale, but, you know, it's enough to kind of explore the composition and you know, to be able to show people adequately what your idea is. So, of course, you know, I wanted to get the proportions right and so on. This is aluminium armature wire, so you can see it's bendy, but it's also it retains its shape. So it's very good. You can, you know, kind of you know, make an arm, you know, and so on. So that is, and you get it in different sizes. This is the size that I use to. So basically, you create a skeleton, you know, which you then build the clay onto. And in fact, with the hands, I used very, very fine wire and created a little kind of skeleton within, extending from the end of this wire. I created a little hand in very fine wire that I could then model onto.
So do you start from like a drawing, or do you just start creating in sort of 3 dimension?
No, actually, I did do a drawing at 40 centimeters, and the child stands at 26. So I could just have an image of the scale, and that was helpful. But then basically I just start measuring. I've got a good metal ruler, and this is an extremely useful tool for sculpting, for measuring. It's called calipers, and they're on. You can see they bend. So you're just constantly checking your measurements, and so if I was working on the arms or whatever, and then I've got I particularly like working with these wooden tools. So as you get a smaller detail, and actually with the child, I ended up having to use a cocktail stick and then a large needle just to work on some of the finer detail.
You build the clay onto the wire sort of skeleton.
Yeah. So you then just take your lumps of clay and you just pack it on, and then you use your tool your hands, fingers, and your tool to kind of model the model.
That's fascinating. So what happens? So obviously you've worked the clay. Obviously, it's then got to get to bronze somehow. Can you explain a little bit about how that process works?
Yes. Well, I don't. Of course, the bronze of this has gone now. I had to say goodbye to it. But I have got a rubber mould and a bronze piece that I can use just to show you. It happens to be a bronze rat. So this is, I was out walking with my dogs and I found a dead rat on the path. And I think a buzzard had caught it and dropped it because it had puncture wounds at the head. Anyway, I thought, it's not that often that you get the chance to look at a rat to study it. So I took it home and I just thought, well, I'll just do a clay model, just, out of interest. So how do you get from your clay model, so something like this, you take it to the foundry and they have to make a rubber mould. And this would have had more than 2 pieces. The rat, they were able to, I think you can see the shape of it there. Yes. They took my clay and they created a 2-part rubber mould. They separately moulded the tail. So this really does demonstrate a 2-part mould, and you can see the little sort of buttons and recesses they've made so that they can accurately put it together like that. Because then the next stage is that into the cavity of the mould, the wax is poured. Right. And you can see this is a green wax, and it's hollow. They don't want to cast solid bronze. It would just be too heavy. You can imagine even a life-size portrait head would be tremendously heavy and wasteful of bronze. And I sometimes think a way of understanding it is you go from your positive, your 3D piece, to a negative mould, back to a positive in the wax. The wax version is encased in a heat-proof ceramic material. They dip it and then emollicite, a sort of like a kind of grit, is thrown at the heat-proof ceramic material, and it creates a shell around the wax. They put what are called runners coming off the wax, so the wax is melted away.
Yes.
All right. They heat it. The wax is melted away, and this is the lost wax process, which goes back to the Egyptians. It sort of goes back centuries. So then again, you have a cavity, and into that cavity is poured the molten bronze, and that's why you need those runners, which create channels, because the channels allow you have the pouring channel, and you have a channel through which the excess bronze can, because it sort of rushes into the mold to get to fill it, and the excess bronze needs somewhere to go. So then you have another positive, this time in bronze. They have to do what's called chasing up. They have to cut off those runners where the excess bronze escaped. They clean up the bronze, and then the final stage is the patination. I've got a portrait head here. So this is it's like a mask, really. I wanted a section rather than, in this case, the full portrait. So you can actually see that it's hollow.
Yes, fascinating.
The patination, that is done with heat, so a gas torch and chemicals. Right. And so the piece is heated up with the flame, and then the chemicals are applied with a brush. A chemical reaction happens on the surface of the bronze.
Does the chemical get put on in like specific places that you want to highlight, or?
Well, is it random? It's not random. It's extremely skillful, and I think most sculptors, you want to be there when that's being done, because you want to make sure you achieve the patination that you want. And in this case, and actually in my Emily Williamson piece, there was an initial colour, a sort of darker bronze that was applied.
Right.
And then on this piece, I've got sort of green. You can see, and that's it's called verdigris.
Yeah.
And that is created with copper. So they drop some copper sulfate, I think, into water, dissolve it, and then that's kind of painted on. And the way it's applied creates the patina, the colour. And then it's waxed to protect it.
Oh, okay. A bit like waxing your car, kind of.
Like waxing your car. Yeah.
When I viewed the four maquettes, the finalist maquettes, they've all got very slightly different patination kind of effect, slightly different colours and finishes, aren't they? Which is quite fascinating. So and obviously that's just different chemicals that are used to create that effect.
Exactly. And as you can see, it's to create a bronze, you go through a number of stages, and it's extremely skillful. Yeah, it really is. It's an incredibly skillful process, and I like the fact that it's an ancient process as well. You feel you're kind of connecting to this ancient art,
but it's almost eternal, I guess. I mean, I presume a bronze statue would last indefinitely. I mean, they do weather over time, or
they do, and that can change the colour, but they are incredibly durable. And I'm sure you've seen, there have been pieces that have been pulled up from the sea, and
So we're up here
That's the croft, that's Emily's house. So you can see the other side of the lane to where we just came from. Yeah, that's the church we just passed. Okay. What is that? Hello. Yes, we've come to see the maquette exhibition.
Can I just have a name and number?
Of course you can. Oh, well, we have got we can scan the app. We have got.
It's going to be hard because there's
Yeah.
elements.
They're all,
Each one,
each one captures something, doesn't it? Yeah, they're all really, really something. So, yeah, anyway, right, let's get inside before we... Oh! Thank you. Do you want to leave brollies out here? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just put your hand down.
Go.
It's
Oh, yeah.
automatic. That's it. Yay!
Thank you.
Thanks.
Slimy. That's really slimy.
It really is.
Ah. Right, let's let that dry a little bit before we go anywhere else. Hello.
Please take one of these each.
Oh, we've already voted actually.
We have already voted, yes.
And this time, to be honest, we just started hand-painting that. He was sneezing a lot, and he had a runny nose, so he was suffering with hay fever. But this lady designed a dress for one of the sculptors. Oh,
Yes, I did, yeah.
what do you think?
They're fabulous, aren't they? Yeah.
You would feel great to think I can't.
Well, it's not something that happens every day, is it? You know, to have something that you've made cast in bronze, and the potential, you know, it's got a 25% chance of actually being the statue of Emily Williamson. That's incredible, you know, that's just yeah, that doesn't happen every day. So yeah, amazing to see. So and all four of the designs are also they're lovely. They really are. So I don't envy. Yeah, I don't envy the panel that's got to choose the final one. But
So, if you did win and your statue got commissioned to be made life-size, can you briefly explain how that process works? How do you go from your 40-centimetre maquette to a full-size statue, and what kind of logistical issues does that throw up?
Really, in a similar way to building an armature at this size, I would create an armature, a life-size armature. I would work with a model. So again, my model this time was Hannah, and I would ask her to model again. So she, as before, she'd be wearing the dress, and I think my granddaughter would be the model for the child, but I would work from the photographs of Melissa as a child to try and create a likeness to Melissa when she was a child, not using wire, but using I can't think of the word, sort of piping and quite strong,
Sturdy kind of.
You want to make a metal structure, again, like a skeleton, onto which you then build up your clay.
So you have to basically start from scratch again, essentially from nothing.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Oh my goodness.
I know that the decision is being made in November.
Yes.
And then the plan is that the unveiling of the life-size piece is April 2023.
Yes.
So, there is more than a year. But of course, the foundry would need, I don't know how many months, but they would want, a number of months for the mold making. They would have to come to the studio to make the mold. And then, going through that whole casting process, life size, it would take a long time.
Wow.
So kind of similar process, but all enlarged.
Yes. And do you have kind of input, at a state? I mean, what if something goes wrong? Does it go wrong at all ever? Or?
Well, the foundry I'm using now, they are incredibly skillful, and you do want to work closely with them. To go at each stage and, to check the wax stage, to check when it's in raw bronze. You want to check it before the patination is done. So at each stage, you want to check and you want to be involved.
What would it mean to you if you did win? Just an impossible question to answer.
I would be so happy. It would be an absolute honour. And as I said before, a project I really, really feel an interest in and commitment to. So, it would be wonderful. And I didn't say earlier, but in my proposal with the these different generations, thinking about taking it forward, there's a book by an author called Roman, is he called Generic? Called The Good Ancestor, and it's thinking long term in a short term world, and he really asks the question, how can we be good ancestors? And I think Emily Williamson, she stands for somebody who is a good ancestor. What she achieved, her motivation, and the fact that, as you commented, the RSPB is still going strong today. It has over 1 million members worldwide.
Yeah.
And the problems that we're facing with the environment, climate change, conservation, it's so important. And so to be involved in a project that is dealing with those questions, I think is, would feel very worthwhile.
Well, thank you very, very much, Claire, for joining me this evening and answering those few questions. Of course, I, and I'm sure my followers, will wish you all the luck in the world with the vote and the announcement in November. We will, of course, pop the link into my comments down below so you can go and vote yourself, and also, of course, have a look at the other finalist maquettes because they are all stunning and really do all capture each something a little bit different of Emily's, what we know of her character, and obviously her campaign to save the birds.
Thank you so much for your interest and your support, and also I couldn't have done it, without the beautiful dress you made. So your work is fantastic.
On July the 1st, 1921, the Plumage Act was finally passed into UK law. Championed by the first female Member of Parliament, Nancy Astor, the importation of exotic feathers was finally halted. Some cynics might look at the post-war trends for smaller and less ostentatious hats and wonder if the feather trade was less lucrative than it had been, and it was finally more convenient to consider wildlife overlining the pockets of London businessmen. But I think we can be grateful that the Act was passed, and after 30 years of campaigning, it paved the way for the RSPB and other conservation organisations to continue to protect our bird species and their habitats all over the world. Some species weren't so lucky. The Carolina parakeet was hunted as both an agricultural pest and for its colourful feathers, and along with deforestation of its habitats in central North America, the last wild sighting was recorded in 1910, and the last known bird died in Cincinnati Zoo in 1918. The species was declared extinct in 1939. There is a slightly bittersweet twist to the tale. The green parakeet, one of 3 parrot species native to the USA and a cousin of the Carolina parakeet, found favour as a domestic pet during the 20th century. And now, small colonies of escaped pets have established themselves in the UK, and one such colony has made its home in Fletcher Moss Park, Emily's former home.
Oh, they are the parakeets. Yes, yes, it is. So
Yeah, I definitely saw
see
it.
it. Yeah.